Cuccinelli, and political commentators Simone Sanders and Maria Cardona. Good evening, one and all.
Hey, Don.
Okay, Maria, so according to this new poll out by AP and ORC, most Americans think President Trump is a racist. 57% of all adults, more than 80% of blacks, 75% of Hispanics, and nearly 50% of whites. What's your reaction?
I have one word. Duh. I mean, this is something that the president has proven time and again, even before he took office over a year ago. This has been the way that he has conducted himself in business. We saw that in the 70s, he and his father were sued for denying housing to blacks and Hispanics. We saw clearly right before he announced for president, his big birther movement that made him explode onto the political scene. And the day that he announced for president, when he called Mexicans rapists and criminals, and it just went on and on after that. The Charlottesville incident, the Judge Curiel incident, where he said that he could not do his job because he was of Hispanic heritage. And
we only have so much time, Maria.
Interestingly enough, Judge Curiel just decided something in favor of Trump. So I think the question moving forward is, what are Americans going to do about it?
Yeah. Ken, I want to ask you, because there's a stark partisan breakdown here. 85% of Democrats, 21% of Republicans. But are you surprised that 21% of Republicans think the president is a racist?
Well, if you think back to how tumultuous this president's path was to becoming president through a field of 17, I expect to see residual, never Trumper type people in that category, and these kinds of splits on these kinds of questions are pretty common. But obviously it's just more sensitive with this president, one who probably sets records for being insensitive.
Wait. It's pretty common that 21% of Republicans think our own president is a racist? When was the last time that happened?
No, what I'm talking about is it's pretty common. If you ask a negative question about a Democrat president, most Republicans will agree with it and most Democrats will disagree with it, but it won't be universal. This happens to be the question du jour. So that's what I'm talking about.
But she's talking about, the question was about Republicans, specifically Republicans, 21%.
Yes, I understand that.
But you're saying, you seem to be dismissing it as if it's the way the question is
President Trump
asked, as opposed to the substance of the question.
No. This president was elected president while having an unfavorable rating higher than his favorable rating. He happened to run against someone who had a similar situation, and he has never been a warm fuzzy or concerned about any of this stuff, and not to say he shouldn't be. Clearly, I think he goes way too far in that respect. Simone, I think that's where a lot of this comes from.
I want you to respond to this, because if you look at the latest polling, I think it's somewhere 70 or 80% of Republicans are still behind, if I'm not mistaken. Still behind this president, which means that they think he is 21%, yet they still support him. Simone, no, am I off on that?
No, you're not off. You're absolutely right, Don. Look, I think this goes back to the election. I think a number of Republicans, conservative folks, people that do not view themselves as quote-unquote Trump Republicans, pulled the lever for Donald Trump and continue to support him because he is, in fact, the quote-unquote Republican president. And they don't necessarily agree with the things that he's saying. Even if they do think that he's a racist, they think that he will still be a better president in terms of a Republican agenda than anyone else. And, frankly, I think that's just a sad place for us to be.
I don't disagree with Simone. We all know my position on Donald Trump as a conservative. I lamented his rise and the quality Republican candidates that he took out that weren't bigots. I was telling you, Don, I struggle with whether he's a racist or just a bigot that traffics in racial stereotypes. Isn't that a difference in
degrees, though?
Well, sort of. I mean, yes, but I think for the purposes of the conversation, he's not Bull Connor racist, but he's a bigot. You know what I mean? So I don't want to diminish when it's real active racism on things. It just could be an academic exercise. But the fact that this many people, that we're even having this conversation, I agree with Simone, is a sad state of affairs for this country. But it's nobody's fault but Donald Trump's. And the fact that so many people try to make excuses for the litany of things that Maria listed, and among others, we are kindred spirits on this aspect of Donald Trump. The fact that people try to excuse that away is troubling, because there's It's not okay. The way he behaves, the way he characterizes
can I
people,
comment down?
those kinds of
can.
things are just not okay, especially coming from
I've
someone
often
in the
said
office of
if
the
you're not,
presidency.
if you don't prioritize racism or bigotry or misogyny or whatever, that means you condone it, right? And you're condoning it in a certain
Yes.
way.
Yeah.
You're
Yes.
adjacent.
Yeah.
Adjacent means you're standing beside
you're
it. That's what
complicit.
adjacent
Yeah.
means.
Silence is complicity.
So
Yeah.
go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, so a lot of the list that we heard, the very thorough list all the way back to the 70s, was well known to voters when they made their choice in November of 2016. This president hasn't changed in any of these regards, and but voters knew what they were getting.
Ken,
they rejected the alternative,
you're just
and they
remaking the point
accepted
that
this.
I just made and that we just made. Yes,
Right.
people knew about it, but does that make it okay? I mean, this is a large number of people, an alarming
what I was
number of
gonna
people
say, Don.
think
Yeah.
such a horrible thing about the president.
Yeah, I will
Except
not.
for-
Don, I
except
will
for-
not
I
argue
would say-
that we're in
I
a
would say
really
this.
sad place politically. I would have said that 2
I would
years
say
ago,
this,
3
and
years ago.
I would say this, and I actually think Ken might agree with me. I actually think a lot of people who voted for Trump, including a lot of Republicans, were at least hoping that he was saying these things during the campaign just for effect. Not that that makes it okay. I actually
I think it
think
makes it
that
worse.
makes it even worse.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I do think that a lot of people thought that and he even said it himself, that he could be more presidential than anybody else. But the fact of the matter is that he has proven time and again that this is who he is. This is what his heart is. And it is not a pretty picture. And the question is, what are Americans going to do about it now? Which is why the midterm elections are so indicative of where this pendulum is swinging. And Democrats just this week went through and flipped their 39th district from Republican to Democrat, because I do think that many Americans are starting to prioritize this and understand that he is turning this country into something that they don't recognize.
Simone, you'll get the first one on the other side of the
Don,
break.
can
We'll
I
be
say one more
yes,
thing?
we'll be
Okay.
right back. We'll talk about it when we come back. So we're back with Tara Setmeyer, Ken Cuccinelli, Simone Sanders, and Maria Cardona. Okay, Simone, I know you want to weigh in, but I just want to play this before you weigh in. This is the president. Watch this.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. Look at my African American over here. Look at him. Are you the greatest?
We're building a wall. He's a Mexican. We're building a wall between here and Mexico.
If you are saying he can't do his job because of his race, is that not the definition of racism?
I don't think so at all.
Are you
I
racist?
am the least racist person that you have ever met. I am the least racist person.
So this has been happening. We've been talking about this since the campaign began.
Yeah, I just want to remind people that Donald Trump is one of the architects and was one of the spokespeople for the racist birther movement that asserted President Obama was not, in fact, born in this country. So I just want to make sure folks understand something, that the fact that Donald Trump is not Bull Connor's version of racism does not mean he is not, in fact, a racist or just as bad. I think 21st century racism looks a little bit different. It's not necessarily white hoods and yelling the N-word in the street. So racism is, in
Kinda
fact,
is.
a system
Kinda came back.
Yeah, I mean,
Unfortunately.
well, yeah, Meg, you're right. Maybe
We saw it
we
in
come in full
Charlottesville.
circle.
But they're wearing khakis.
But I mean,
these days.
racism, it's a khakis and polos in some effects. So
Right,
racism
and
is a
no
system,
hoods.
Don, and it's not always transactional. And Donald Trump, I do believe, is traffics in racism, is in fact a racist, hangs out with the white supremacists, sympathizes with them. And the fact that some American people voted for him despite this does not excuse the fact that this is in
Right.
fact true. So we need to stop conflating the fact with the fact that Donald Trump was elected to the fact that and equating that with that this doesn't matter, because that is in fact not the case.
It's true. Just because you can explain it doesn't mean you should excuse it.
The number of people who say that Trump is racist, 57%, though, I mean, it's very similar to the number of people who disapprove of Trump's performance in office
high.
in a recent poll. Yeah. So is that because people either love him or hate him, Maria?
Well, I mean, I think it's certainly that, but I also think that they are starting to realize just how pernicious having a racist in the Oval Office is, because it goes beyond words. It goes beyond all of the insulting litany of things that you just rant on, and the list goes on and on. We could probably do a whole program on the sound bites of how racist his comments have been in the past. But it goes to policies that actually have been incredibly hurtful to the communities of color in this country.
I'm glad you said that, because I want to
Yes,
I want to pose this to Ken.
Okay.
There's a concern about the impact of his policy. So let's talk policy. People say, oh, well, you know, this is how people feel. They feel he's racist. He said this or whatever.
Yep.
But about his policies, here's what the poll says: 57% of Americans believe his policies have been bad for Muslims. 56% believe they have been bad for Hispanics. 47% believe they have been bad for blacks. Are you concerned Republicans will pay the price for this in 2018, Ken Cuccinelli?
Well, anytime you have negative feelings towards the president, we pay a price for that. But the reality on an economic level, just take African Americans, is they've had 2 better quarters, if I remember my numbers correctly, under this president than they've had in about a decade. So, yeah,
right.
how
And
people
the-
feel,
and
and
the
you use that
unemployment
word,
rate for-
feel. Hey,
Hold on,
I
Simone, I'll let you
quietly.
respond.
Don't interrupt me.
I'm gonna let you
It's still
You know, it's
I'm
one
just saying,
thing
the
to talk
unemployment
about
rate
how
is high
people
for
feel, and that's how people feel is important. They decide how they vote based on how they feel. But the facts and objectivity are important too when it comes to economic success and
Okay.
improvement. And
But
we're
you
on
know-
an improvement path.
Simone, go ahead.
the points that Republicans like to, some of our Republican friends, not all, like to cite around the unemployment rate for African Americans in this country is a bunch of BS. And I'm sorry, but the fact of the matter is that the unemployment rate for black people in this country is still 2 times or more higher than white people in this country. And so I'm not happy about that. Yes, the economy is actually an issue that cuts across the board. Healthcare is an issue that cuts across the board. But I don't think what my friend Ken here understands is that this is not how people necessarily just feel about the president. We have the policies that have come out of this White House and out of this administration have had time to sit and fester for a little bit, if you will. And so folks aren't just telling you how they feel about the Muslim ban. They're telling you how they've directly been impacted by it and why, in fact, they think this policy is bad for Muslim people.
And I always have to remember when President Obama took office, the unemployment rate among African Americans was almost at 17%, somewhere 16.7, 16.9.
Yeah.
And by the time he left, it was at 7%, the low sevens, and now it's at 6.8. But still,
those numbers are difficult because during the whole, everyone uses
But-
the unemployment rate, which is not really accurate because it's only like Q1,
But
and it doesn't
it's a
count labor
snapshot that, listen, Tara,
participation.
listen, it
only
is a
counts people
snapshot
seeking
in,
work at the time.
I'm only saying it because Ken brought it up in the
No, I
conference,
know,
but
but I'm
it is a
just saying.
snapshot with where we are at the moment. And if you look at over the course of that time and the course of this
Right.
time, there's not that much for this president to brag about. Yes, it's in good
Well, sure.
territory.
Well,
Anyway.
right.
There's two quick things about that. A rooster will take credit for the dawn, okay? Which means that what Trump is taking credit for was not of his making, number one. Number two, to Ken's point about how people feel, look, they might see that the economy is getting better and they actually do credit Obama more than they do Trump. But more importantly, especially for Hispanics and African Americans and Muslims, when you have to cower in your home because you believe either that the police are going to be after you or that somebody's going to come deport you even though you are a citizen of the United States, or that someone
All right.
else is going to attack you because of what the president
Wait, I got
has
10
been saying,
seconds.
That's the bottom line here.
that is going to be a big deal in the midterms.
Right. It's perception is reality. Whether the metrics bear it out or not, it's how people feel. And unfortunately, Donald Trump has given a lot of people, a lot of minorities, reason to feel that he